Dr. Yamamoto, how are you?
I am doing great. How are you?
I am highly caffeinated and excited to talk to you. As
Nothing
always.
new. Always good.
Nothing. I actually, what's interesting is I've been cutting down caffeine lately, and it doesn't change anything. Like I didn't get headaches, and I don't lose energy.
Oh, somehow that doesn't surprise me.
Indeed. You and I have had many conversations around education in Idaho. You were in the legislature for 4 years. You are on the board of 2 charter schools. We did connect at one point about security in charter schools because one of the charter schools that you're on the board for does have armed security that goes through. And you were an advocate for, yes, appropriate protocols and appropriate safety for our children, just not a, give guns to everyone kind of position.
Absolutely.
But again, very much a fan of like, let's have the most robust, safe protection for our kids. I thought that was a very reasonable position. And here we are today. You are also on part of the organization Idaho Children Are Primary, and you're looking to advocate for public schools. Now, not necessarily public schools in their current iteration. Obviously, being on 2 boards of 2 charter schools are a niche that have been carved out where the government acknowledges, look, we're not going to always get it right every single time. And we're not always going to reflect what the individual community values are every single time. And we can use the charter school system to offer a government funded alternative to the just neighborhood private school that, children can go to and families can engage in that can more closely reflect values of the community. And again, that's considered a public school because it's publicly funded.
Right.
That just inherently means that you recognize, hey, there are things that could be better or are not always hitting the mark with public schools. But that doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater. It doesn't mean you that doesn't mean you destroy all public school. You revise public school and you offer different options for people. A lot of conversation has been had around school choice and what we do with our public schools. What do you think the main problems are? And what do you think the right solutions are?
I definitely think that given what we saw in the last 2 years between the Senate Ed and House Ed, we would have schools come in that were knocking it out of the park. And the schools we picked, the public schools we picked, whether it be a traditional public school or a charter school, was that given the metrics that we have all agreed on are what we send to the federal government and what we look at as a state and compare from state to state, how are they doing on those metrics, and how are they doing so well? And what is it that they have figured out that given the students that they have, because you don't get to pick who they are, they come with all of their issues, how are they adapting, whether it be curriculum, the teaching methodology, how they work with the parent, how they work with this, how are they doing that? And the idea being, how do we then take those best practices and then use them to inform practices in other schools, other public schools? Because to your point, we've invested money into this system, and then to think we're just going to get rid of that system or that we'll starve it to death and start a whole new system, just from the get-go, that's problematic. If we can't control or fix the one we already have, then why do we think that creating a whole new one is going to be the answer to that?
Well, I actually was just speaking with the State Department of Education, and they outlined, and I think Senator Lent also articulated this, that we have, I think, something like 80 federal regulations on our public schools. And then Idaho itself, as a state, has another like 50. And it could be 50 and 80 or 80 and 50, but one of them was 80, one of them was 50. But that means we have 130 like really specific regulations and parameters that are wrapped around public education, just in general. And
which also means that you have administrators and other people and staff who have to address those things, make sure those reports the information is gathered, put into the appropriate spreadsheet or however they want that documentation and sent off, instead of spending time in classrooms or with students. So that is an issue.
And again, to consider just what you're saying, which is one criticism of the public school that I hear, public system I hear frequently is like it's bloated with these administrators. And and I don't know anything about it. It's like I'm, just the guy here talking to a bunch of people. But if what you're saying is true, which is, hey, look, every regulation that comes along, you have to articulate or prove that you're meeting that requirement. That regulation is being honored. And that means that because Idaho itself has, let's say, 80 additional requirements that go onto the public school system, Idaho's own regulations are creating a bloat of administrators. And the bloat of administrators is one thing that people have said, hey, that's why we should have school choice, because we're wasting money on these administrators. But Idaho itself is producing the need for those administrators to fulfill the obligations.
And not only that, they complain about their salary, but I can tell you most administrators, myself included, but other administrators, whether it be at the elementary or the secondary level, we were not just working during school hours. We were working after hours. There was rarely a time that I was done with school until well after 10, 11 at night, because if I wanted to spend time in classrooms or with students during the day when they were there, then that left all of those reports and all of that administrivia still has to be done, all the observations that you made, and then you had to write up into this specific form that most teachers said by the time they got that feedback, in order to do it the way the state was requiring, they didn't feel like it was very helpful. I agree. I think we tie our hands in this false sense of that we're holding people accountable, when in point of fact, we're keeping them from doing the good and hard work of actually meeting the needs of students. And I'll be the first one to say that I don't think that schools meet all the needs of all the students. And I will be the first to say that if you have 100, most certainly the one is just as important as the 99. But to be the lowest in funding in the whole nation and be punching above our weight in how public schools are doing, and just thinking we can give less money, then that's going to work. Or we shouldn't throw more money after it, but now we're going to throw money at a whole different system. You can see how it's just like political whiplash for me to think, wait a second, This is not making sense.
Well, and again, the idea of a free market that I've heard a lot of people, I've had Ron Naden several times, and he's articulated his vision for what school choice should be. And he very much believes that free markets are essentially things that will produce over a long enough period of time, and given enough flexibility, they'll produce a good result. And I love like free market of ideas. Like if I talk to enough people, then, the better position or the best position starts to kind of flush itself out. And you're like, oh, like, okay, after 10 conversations, I can see this person. That person was kind of like, but like they had an idea, and you put it all together and you're like, okay, here it is. And
so we'll do that with roads.
Well, yeah, that's not as good an idea.
Oh, problematic.
Well, here's the other thing that's problematic about this as it relates to school choice. We could produce a free market with our public schools right now, right? Like the idea is, hey, these private schools do not have the regulations. They'll be able to figure out how to administer education best, and we should fund that. Fine. Why don't you just do that for the public schools then? Like we could produce a free market without funding a second system, or at least that's what I've heard a lot of people say, which is like, why do that?
Right. And then why don't we go ahead and use the same metric for accountability, which are parental feet? And if they don't like it, they walk away and go do something else, whatever that might be. And, why aren't we doing that now? I think there's a reason why we aren't doing that now.
How do you mean?
So what I've heard is that the free market idea is that you let parents go to these, the private schools or whatever else they think of to do other than the traditional public school, and they don't have to meet the same criteria or held accountable to the same measures as the traditional public schools, whether that be charter public schools or traditional public schools, because parents vote with their feet and they just leave. The same can be said of our state institutions. We give them a certain amount of money too, and we aren't satisfied that it's just feet leaving. We have criteria. We have standards that we expect them to meet. And if they don't, we want to know why. And yet now it's okay to just give money to whomever, even people who don't pay any money in to education taxes, or people. And I guess this is what's just slaying me about this whole argument, is that To think that there's anybody in Idaho that if they're looking at their taxes are paying $5,000 or $7,500 a year for education in taxes, that is not happening. And yet we're going to open that floodgate to allow that money to go to individuals because they have decided that what's happening in the public school isn't meeting their needs, whether or not they've actually talked to that school about what those needs might be. Just from a systems and even a free market perspective, that does not make sense.
What do you mean as far as the people aren't paying $7,500 in taxes towards education?
If you actually look at your tax, when you get, this is what we pay, for my husband and I, we're paying about around $400 in taxes every year to our Caldwell School District.
Oh, gotcha. That's the supplemental levy or the bond or something.
Right. Yeah. And then how much of it is actually from the state are people paying? I don't believe it's $5,000 or $7,500. So it used to be a conservative value that if you wanted something, you needed to pay for it. And if you couldn't afford it, then you couldn't afford it, but you didn't get to put your hand in somebody else's pockets to make up the difference of what it is that you want. So now all of a sudden, this manner of school choice has become this shiny gold ring, and it's just become this precious thing that the Republican Party feels like they must have because it's sort of like your credibility as a true conservative Republican to have this thing, whether it's a budget busting thing, whether it's a take money from other people like me who maybe I don't want my tax dollars going to that. I want my tax dollars going into the regular public schools. But now you get to decide that you get to do what you want because that's what you want. That doesn't seem very conservative to me. And that's been my issue with this whole foray into I want the shiny gold thing. And the problem is that gold standard is gold out of my pocket and other people's who maybe don't think that that's how it should go, especially since the Constitution says no.
I spoke with Chairman Pickett, who's the chairman of the House Ed Committee, and he used to be on Tax and Rev. Mm-hmm. And that was an interesting combo. I didn't know that he had used to be on Tax and Rev, but I asked him, we spoke, I think, a week ago. I said, hey, is there any dollar that's ever come out of Idaho's taxpayer coffers that has gone somewhere that had no accountability? Like, has there ever been a single cent that we don't have to have like the strictest regulations and follow up with, hey, where did this money go? And this is what the money's supposed to go to, and did it actually go to that thing? With a very specific goal in mind to judge, like, okay, it worked or it didn't work. And he was like, no, that doesn't exist. And if it did, if it ever happened to accidentally come out, people would have a real problem with it. And that's what I don't understand about this in particular, is that it's like there is the accountability argument for let's make parents accountable for it. It's like, okay, but this money is supposed to be slotted for education, and education has classically been designated as like the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. Yeah, throw some science and history in there, whatever you want. That's what it's supposed to be. It's my understanding that that's what the Constitution has made it accountable to. Mm-hmm. It's like, you need to be checking these boxes. You know what? Here's a question for you. And I have not been able to flesh this one out. We have, let's say, groundskeepers. Okay, like the Capitol. Capitol's got a big lawn, all around it, whole thing. Just fine. When there are no tents on it, there are lawns. It's like totally fine. And let's say you have an in-house landscaping crew, and you're like, hey, landscaping crew, you have to mow this lawn once a week, and you can't let it go above 1.5 inches, and you got to fertilize it every 2 months. And they're like, all right, like mowing it once a week, 1.5 inches every 2 months. If the Capitol or the people in charge of maintenance were like, we pay this guy too much, or like, I don't think that we're best served by having an in-house operation. Like, let's outsource this. You go directly to the free market and you say, hey, here's our contract. You have to mow this once a week, can't get longer than 1.5 inches, and you got to fertilize it every 2 months. You do this, and this money right here, this money's yours. Mm-hmm. And then the landscapers come and they say, all right, how much is it going to cost me to do that? Like, I think I could do that for X amount of dollars. I think I could. And you have an assessment from the free market saying, okay, we want to take this challenge of turning a profit and being in the black, or we don't. And they get free will. If the education community said, hey guys, here it is. You got to take everyone. You got to abide by these federal regulations and state regulations. You got to do all of these things. And if you can do that, here's the money. Like, why not do that? I would actually be fine with that. But that's not what we're doing. And not that I'm not fine with any of the conversations going on, but like, I wouldn't even have a question about that. I'm like, oh, they have to abide by the exact same things. Yeah, sure. Let everybody go crazy. Like, I'm good with that. Kind of like, SpaceX with that, with shooting people into space. It's like, yeah, you can get government money. You got to send something up into space. You got to get it back down. It's very complex. Don't kill anyone. They're like, okay, I'm going to give that a shot. Give me the money. Like, has there ever been a conversation like that where it's like, let's ask for the exact same thing? Because then it seems like there would be no conversations. Just, yeah, government contractors. You just got to do what the same in-house guys were doing.
I think I don't believe that conversation has been had at all. But I also think that what concerns me about the privatization or this free market idea is that you do have these fly-by-night organizations that can come in. If it's not working for them, they can set up in a strip mall, for example. And if it doesn't work for them, they could close up that night and be gone and leave those kids hanging. And then what happens? Well, they would probably go back into the regular public schools. And will the money follow them back in? Well, not if there's no money to follow them. And then are we going to go after that money? And do we really have the tax commission and the AG ready and they have nothing more to do than to go after, litigate for money that has already been spent and maybe can't even be recovered? So, but to your initial point, have we really rolled up our sleeves and tried to decide what is it? We are perfectly aligned to the result we are getting, given how much money we put in, what the state has said that this is what you've got to do. If that isn't the result we want, then we really do need to go back to the drawing board and to be willing to say, well, I had people tell me that we should be doing reading, writing, arithmetic, teaching them how to change the tire on their car, do their taxes.
The do your taxes is so ridiculous. It's like, ain't nobody doing their taxes. And if you do, you're crazy. Like, outside of TurboTax, you got a 1030 easy, whatever the heck. Like, yeah, fine. If you have one line item, it's like, this is the money I made. You just input it and you got no deductions. Outside of that, you should never do your own taxes. like, yeah, maybe write a check, no taxes.
Yes. Yeah. And just all of those ideas about, if we didn't think that they need to be at school for 6 hours, if we decided, you know what, we could do what we need to do. If you're saying we just need to do reading and math, a little bit of science and social studies, we could probably do it in 4 hours, and we could do one group, keep classes smaller by doing one group in the first 4 hours, one group in the second 4 hours. But what then becomes of that? Well, the expectation is that you're taking care. I know where my student is for X number of hours while I'm working or whatever. Right. That. So you can see how just tradition and what we're used to and all of those things get in the way of the real discussion that we need to have. I would doubt there would be one administrator, one teacher that you could talk to that would say everything's hunky-dory in public ed and we should just continue on as is. I don't think that person exists. So what is it that the people closest to the issues, what is it really? If you look at what parents say when Boise State does that survey, almost all the majority of parents are happy with their neighborhood school. It's everybody else's school that they think is all messed up, Oh,
I did not know that.
Mm-hmm. And the indoctrination is happening somewhere else.
Not happening in my school. I love my English teacher, but I know people are being groomed at this other school somewhere else.
Or you have one person or a couple people in the community who decide because they've had a bad experience with one teacher, they're all that way. And so these are the things that we have to work through when we're trying to decide what is it that we really need to do with the public schools. I'm not satisfied with them. I think that there are things that we need to look at. I think it's we haven't looked at all the issues of why are we not having more students proficient. What are the things that come with those students, and are they coming? I mean, even attendance is just a huge issue, and schools don't always have the ability to make people
show up. What's coming with them? I had this crazy experience. So I was in SAT prep for like almost 20 years, and I had this wild experience where I had this group. It was a 6-person classroom, and I had this group of 3 girls that were friends that would come to class, and they came through, and it's like I was missing mark with it. I couldn't quite figure it out. I was like, what's it like? Homework's not improving, and I tracked everything. So every time somebody came in, I counted how many mistakes you made, and I would compare week 2, week 5, week 7, all of this different. So again, I'm really trying to track progress. And I would also see them in class, and okay, you should have been getting this one because we talked about this a couple weeks ago. You're not, whatever it is. So there was just one group. I'm like, it's not clicking. I don't know what's going on. And they made fine enough progress. But one of the gals said, hey, I'm taking the test again. Can I come back and get some review? Absolutely. Come back in. I got open seats anytime. So she comes back in, and I find out that this blew me away. I find out that she was like, oh my God, it's so much better. I'm like, what's better? It turns out she was carpooling with one of the gals, one of her friends. And her friend, while driving, would be smoking pot, steering with her knees, and then texting on her phone, driving 80 miles an hour down the road. And this poor girl is white knuckling the door, holding on for dear life and get to class. So you have 2 people. The poor girl who just saw her life flash before her eyes, who's like, oh my God, I survived, thank God. The other one who's on the moon and just going to town on my cup of noodles and watermelon Sour Patch Kids, because I had these big bags of candy and everything. It wasn't the best from a dietary standpoint, but the kids liked it. And I didn't know any of that. And here this kid's showing up. One's terrified, one's stoned. And of course, it's on me to teach them. Mm-hmm. Now I did. I didn't know these things were going on. I took them however they showed up and, really worked with them as best I could. And they made progress and moved on. But to have somebody, and I had multiple times different kind of stories like this that I patched together at the end. I'm like, okay, this is what was going on. I had a student who I find out after the fact, they're like, oh, she was in a horrible, her dad's an alcoholic, her mom has cancer. She's barely keeping it together. And she would come to class. I'm like, what's going on with this kid? I don't know. And of course I don't pry. It was none of my affair. But I could tell something was going on. And you hear these home lives that kids come from. And this was in an upper class, area. It's really, really tough dealing with people. And I was responsible for these quantifiable improvements. And I took on that responsibility knowing that I was dealing with variables, knowing that I was dealing with human beings. But if somebody were to look at, let's say, my 6-person class, and they're like, all right, Matt, you did fine with 5 of them, or you did fine with 4 of them, but 2 of them, you missed the mark. So you only had a 66% proficiency as an SAT tutor because, 4 out of the 6 did fine, 2 didn't. To say that and then realize okay, that person was on the moon, stoned out of their mind, and that person was horrified that she was going to die. Mm-hmm. Was it a failing of me as an educator?
And should you only get 66% of what they were going to pay you?
Right.
Because that's what you're
and by the way, I don't know, maybe that's how it should go, but I can tell you, if you actually take on the burdens of dealing with human beings in an educational setting, the variables you'll encounter and have to navigate are numerous, and they are treacherous, and they are impossible to predict.
And yet every day, that's what public school teachers sign up for, and it's what they do. And you've named what I really think is the issue. The issue is we should expect a year's growth in a year's time. We should be checking to see what is the progress monitoring, how that kiddo is doing. We should take into account, well, if they're only coming every other day, Little wonder there are gaps in the learning. What are we going to do about that? There are these issues that are coming into play, or that there are learning disabilities, or they're being bullied, or so there are all these things. And if we have a $50 million pot of money that I could draw on to say, I'm going to address those needs in these ways, I'm going to have not make them miss the thing they love, PE, or their music class, but I'm going to have time where I can get them right after school. Maybe they get Sour Patch Kids and
The watermelons were the best.
Watermelons.
Watermelon, Sour Patch.
And then you actually have time to specifically fill the gap or the need of whatever it is that the student is missing. Now everybody else isn't sitting there twiddling their thumbs and wishing they could just go home and do anything else, or on their phones or whatever they're doing, because they're waiting for everybody else to catch up because they're already there. This would mean a total rehaul in how we do school. And the other thing that I wanted to do as a high school principal is to create a school within a school to say that those that were having behavior issues, until we got those taken care of, they rarely were successful academically. So let's have them come, and instead of expecting them to make 7 transitions in a day, which is almost always when their problems occurred, let's put them in a place where they have a teacher they don't move. They stay there, and we work specifically on what is it, where are you having your issues, how do we fill those in, because a lot of the behavior issues are because they're not reading on grade level, they don't understand the math, and so what do? You cause trouble.
Right.
And is that always the issue? No, but a lot of the time that's the issue. So I think
you didn't have as many kids causing problems in my calculus class as you did in like the remedial math class.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I just think it requires I'm just not willing to throw in the towel. We've put a lot into it, and we've starved it, believing that you can't just keep throwing money at something, but money does help. And the $50 million set aside to do something differently proves that people believe that it does matter, and that if you can use it judiciously and specifically and intentionally, that you can make a difference in student outcomes and student learning. Year's growth in a year's time. Why not? These are the issues. Here are the things we have control over and how we're going to address that. What parents do, we really can't address that. And I was never into excuse making. We can only control what we can control.
Right.
But let's take care of business there. And I do not feel like that any of the things that we have done to try to hold people accountable have really gotten to the heart of what it is, what the issues are. And again, that's why Senator Lent and I were saying, what's working out there? What is replicable with that? And how do we need to go about, whether it's training for the administration or the teachers, then let's do that. And, I'm just going to give a shout out to the Bloom group. When they trained their administration for them to take on like an Elevate School, for example, those people come in knowing very clearly what the mission is. They know very clearly that data will drive their decisions. They're aligned, the curriculum, the instruction, the day, the decisions, everything is aligned to what it is that they're trying to achieve. And when they're not hitting the mark, then your job is to go back through and see what's not working here. And then we adjust whatever that is. And sometimes that does require money. It's just a simple fact. Sometimes it requires time. I haven't figured out how you create more time. But I think these are the issues. These are the real issues. And this idea that we're just going to fix it with this pot of money over here and do something, create a whole new system, it just is nonsensical.
I would also, again, I had my contractor analogy, but I think there is value in competition. There is value in, figuring out different systems. If people experiment, they try different things. This is how we as humans learn. I'm also game for, or I think it would be a good idea. It's not like I have a choice in any of this, but I think it would be awesome if you're like, hey, look, these are the 3 best private schools that Idaho has been able to produce. Okay. this is what they do. First off, they kick out students that are not up to snuff. So like, because when you're talking about a school within inside a school and you have essentially a classroom or two of people that are major disruptors and not proficient academically, those people still count with your school, right? Like you can't ditch their test scores. You can't ditch their GPAs. So you're like, okay.
You're responsible for them. Yes.
Right. So the three best private schools, they don't have that burden. They're like, no, you're out. Right. And I hear stories about this all the time because you don't have rights when you go to a private school to like, rights to attendance. Anyway, let's find the best three private schools and look at them, and let's find the best three public schools, and let's find the best three charter schools, and just come together and say, okay, who's doing what? What could be done within these restrictions and these regulations? What are things that can only be done in a private setting that we either think are valuable or not valuable? Just put it all together and then say, okay, here we go. Like, this is what we can do to make the best. Because in recent years, I've really realized that I'm just pro education. I'm pro, let's get the smartest possible kids kicking, screaming, however, I don't care how we make them. And if Representative Chris Mathias was telling me that he had a voucher program in his home state, or his state he was living in when he was a kid, and that he went to like a voucher program high school. He's like, I think it was Massachusetts or something. He was like, we had one of the oldest voucher programs in the country. It's like, okay, so it's not like I'm not against vouchers any more than I'm for vouchers. I am for education. Like, let's work this out. However, and if that means you go to the free market and say, I got $9,000 here if you can accomplish these 10 things. Right? I'd be good with that. Mm-hmm. Right? Or like, hey, you can have this money. You just have to mirror exactly what these schools are doing. Or we look at the schools and like, hey, we're giving you this money. We're going to make your job easier. We're going to eliminate these requirements so you can ditch administrators and do more dollars in the classroom. I'd be good with that too. Like, let's do any of these things. I just feel like it's almost like that conversation's not being had. It's like, no. Let's throw this money, no accountability. Let's let the parents decide, and Godspeed.
Well, and let's talk about God for just a moment. I will just throw this out there as well. I'm a firm believer in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. I am not LDS, but I will tell you, it's pretty impressive that every high school I've ever been at has a seminary that is adjacent to the school. And one period a day, those students are going over to get religious training in what they believe and how they believe they should live their lives. And, they don't get credit for it. So it was meaning that students were having to take additional time in the like early class or online classes or whatever, so that because our numbers of credits were larger than what the state required. So if you believe that what's missing, that the Lord is missing in that education, it needs to be happening at home, but it also can be happening. There was a group who tried to get a non-denominational Christian seminary, if you will, together at the one high school I was at. It didn't get off the ground, but it was available, and it would require no public dollars. It would require for people who believe to be willing to open up their time, their home close to the school, find somebody who could teach the courses, whatever it was that they wanted taught in the way they intended. And then therein lies an issue, I suppose. But I guess I'm saying I think there are ways to accomplish what people want to have done if they are willing to find the ways to do it and not expect the taxpayer to pony up for that choice.
Gotcha. Dr. Yamamoto, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming out. I always enjoy the conversation as somebody who's in the trenches, your perspective. I really value it. It's great. And like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't
Me either.
I don't know what the right answer
promised.
is. Yeah, and I want to know more. Like I did have the good fortune of speaking with Senator Den Hartog, and I loved that conversation, and I got a better understanding about where she was coming from, and I think people hearing it did. I did speak with Representative Pickett, who is the chairman. Like, he's great. I'm hoping to have Representative Clint Hostetler.
Sure.
Yeah, him, and he's run a bill. Like, we need to bring all this to the table.
Agreed.
And let's
have the conversation.
Let's have the conversation. Let's find out what everyone thinks.
And maybe let's do it before we throw $50 million at it. How about that?
Well, I'm moving as fast as I can. Thank you for coming in. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. Thank you.